Hello and welcome back to Mother Tongue, your eyes, ears and finger on the pulse for all parents around the world. Let's get going, shall we? We are so incredibly excited to welcome Sandra Sharpe back to Mother Tongue. Sandra, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you? So happy to be back here.
I am good. No, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. I feel like I wrote these questions at a time that was very prevalent to what I was going through. So I'm really excited to get into today's chat. But before we get started, can you please tell our lovely listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a functional nutrition practitioner and health coach, and I work with women basically to uncover the root causes of their fertility struggles. So there is, unfortunately, a growing number of women who are struggling with fertility, couples that are, going through these really long fertility journeys. And I don't think that they're getting the answers that they need in terms of answering the question why. Why is it becoming harder to get pregnant in this day and age? And it basically spurred from a lot of the work that I was originally doing with women working around hormone health, balancing their hormones from a functional perspective. So really looking at diet and lifestyle, environment, all of these things that also affect fertility. And I helped several women get pregnant along the way. And I really, from my own personal experience of becoming a mother, I think this is something that is really needed in women's health to support women in, and really getting women the answers that they deserve if they are struggling with pregnancy, or how to better prep their bodies for a healthy pregnancy.
I know it's wild how things have changed over the last 20, 50, 100 years. And now the stats say that 1 in 6 women struggle to get pregnant, which is quite mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Why is this? Why is this now our reality?
Yeah, it is an unfortunate reality. And to be honest, I don't see it getting any better over the coming years. It's actually forecasted to even get worse. And there's many factors to this. Our environments are changing, our diets have changed. Women now are getting pregnant later. They are prioritizing other things in their lives. Women are also more depleted. The modern day woman is extremely stressed out, exhausted, more, stretching herself thin, wearing many hats. And also, sperm health in men these days is really, really a problem, because the partner's health has become very questionable. There's a lot of factors in our environment that are affecting sperm health. And I think just in general, couples have a lot of underlying conditions due to all of these things, our environment, our diet changes, and all of that stuff that are not being addressed properly. So these underlying factors are affecting fertility more and more, and we're not addressing them the right way.
So you mentioned their environment and diet. What things in particular have changed in both these aspects that are leading to fertility issues?
So in terms of the environment, look at our environment now. We're inundated with environmental toxins. We are surrounded by all kinds of products we use in our home, on our bodies, on our skin, that are full of toxins that are really affecting our overall health and burdening our liver health, which is, also affecting our hormones. From a diet perspective, there's many things. So, all of the sort of diet culture trends that kind of came out in the 90s, I think women are starting to see the effects of that on their fertility today. So, the low fat craze, the low carb craze, this is controversial, but also the vegan trend. We're seeing a lot of women who are having issues with their hormones and fertility because they have such poor nutrient status. Not to mention that, nowadays in modern day culture, sugar is basically a dietary staple. There is a replacement of nutrient dense foods with sugar and refined carbohydrates. There's a lot more processed foods, packaged foods. Meals are primarily built around carbs and, fats versus protein. So women are very deficient in protein, which is extremely important for our fertility. We're consuming a lot more omega-6s, which are inflammatory, versus omega-3 fats. Saturated fats, which are in like meat and dairy products and, butter and things like that. Saturated fats have been labeled as dangerous for a very long time. And we're missing nutrients that are things like vitamin A and zinc and iron and DHA and vitamin B, choline, all of these things that are really, really essential to our fertility and to our baby's development. And then not to mention like lifestyle habits. So we're obviously stressed out. Our sleeping patterns are all over the place. Our movement patterns, we've become more sedentary. So many women have been on hormonal contraceptives, which have completely shut down their reproductive system essentially and have completely messed up their ovulation. So there's just so many things going on from a nutritional perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, from an environmental perspective, that have definitely over the last few decades contributed to much worse fertility rates.
Wild. And I do want to come back onto the food and flip it on its head and talk about what we can eat to try and conceive. But I want to start with cycles, because I still find it wild that when we're taught about sex education at school, we're constantly told how not to fall pregnant, as opposed to how to understand our bodies better and how our cycles work. I feel like there's a lot of women out there who still don't really understand how their cycles work. And I think I've only really got to grips with mine over the last couple of years, which again is just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give women out there a bit of advice on how they can get to know their cycles a bit better? And does it matter if we have long cycles versus short cycles, or is it more important that we just understand our cycles as opposed to how long or short they are?
No, it's definitely important to navigate your cycle. So understanding what actually happens to the hormones in your cycle, but also understanding certain symptoms. So I think the first thing is to be more bodily aware. So understanding like when your period comes or every month, how does your body react from a symptom perspective? What things do you notice? What patterns do you notice? I think that's the most important thing, because there are more women. I mean, the majority of women out there literally have no connection with their bodies. They are just, every month they get their period. They have no idea what's really happening. Yeah, sure, it's a few days here and there, but they don't understand the symptoms around it and what is actually normal versus not normal. So that's step one. Step two would be to start tracking your cycle. If you're not tracking your cycle, that is super important, because we need to make sure that we are ovulating regularly. Ovulation is not just important for getting pregnant. Ovulation is a sign of overall health. It's a sign that your hormones are, doing the right thing every month. And we need to make sure that the interplay between estrogen and progesterone is in the right place. So that, again, is super important. How do we track our cycles? So we need to track it using either our basal body temperature or our cervical fluid. So those two things are the most accurate way to actually identify when you're ovulating and make sure that you are having a healthy ovulation. In terms of understanding what actually happens in our cycle, so your cycle starts essentially on the first day of your period. So that is day one of your cycle. And when you have your period, your hormones are at rock bottom. So that is the lowest point of your hormone levels in the cycle. So after you finish your period, your estrogen levels essentially rise up along with your FSH and your LH hormones. So FSH is your follicle stimulating hormone. That is basically what develops the follicles in order to mature and get ready to be fertilized. And then your LH is your luteinizing hormone, which basically triggers ovulation. So there's this interplay of hormones at the beginning of the cycle, and estrogen essentially peaks at your ovulation. So it gradually inclines, it peaks at ovulation. And once you ovulate, your body creates something called a corpus luteum. So that corpus luteum is essentially your body produces it every month. It's like a gland, and it is responsible for your progesterone production. So contrary to popular belief, your progesterone can only be created once you've ovulated. I see women all the time getting their progesterone tested at the beginning of their cycle and freaking out because it's low. It will, of course, be low because you are not producing progesterone until after you've ovulated. So progesterone is only present at the second half of your cycle. And if your uterine lining, your estrogen is basically what thickens your uterine lining. Your progesterone is what sheds your uterine lining. And obviously, if you are not pregnant, then your uterine lining sheds, and that is essentially what your period is. So basically, your estrogen levels rise, they peak at ovulation. They are meant to then slowly decline. There's a little bit of a rise in estrogen or a peak in estrogen right before your period, and your progesterone only rises after ovulation and stays high until you get your period. Or if you get pregnant, then that progesterone continues to stay high, obviously, to produce, to support a pregnancy. And what once was the corpus luteum that produced progesterone then becomes a placenta in pregnancy. So that is essentially a very quick overview of your cycle. I forgot to answer also the long and short thing. So yes, it does matter if you have long or short cycles. The normal cycle length of, for anyone should be anywhere between 24 to 35 days. So that is a normal cycle length. Ideally, you want it to be closer to the 28, 29 day mark, 30 day mark. But there are women who get pregnant with slightly lower. I mean, I have a 26-day cycle, for example, commonly, and I got pregnant fine. So the average sort of length of a cycle is about 29 days. If you have a short cycle, so anywhere between sort of 24 days or less, then you could have a condition called luteal phase defect, which essentially means that your luteal phase is shorter, which is the second half of your cycle. So that could potentially mean that you're not ovulating or you're not producing enough progesterone to support pregnancy or to get pregnant. So that is something that would indicate short luteal phase. If you have longer cycles, then that's most commonly due to things like PCOS, or any other factors that could be causing longer luteal phases. So that could even be like stressors, possibly you're not ovulating, and that's again most commonly seen with women who have PCOS.
So interesting. Okay, so we talked about cycles. Now let's say this was actually me. Take it back 5 years ago. We got married, and after we got married, I thought, right, okay, now I don't want to get pregnant tomorrow, but I want to kind of get myself in the best possible position to conceive. So I started by having my coil removed. And this was like, I think 8 months before we actually really tried to get pregnant. What other things can women do, and men actually, to get themselves in the best possible position to conceive?
So ideally from the moment that you say, okay, I'm ready to start trying for a baby, or I'm ready for a pregnancy, ideally, now doesn't always happen, but ideally you want to give yourself about a year to prepare. Why? Because obviously, as you and I know, pregnancy takes a huge toll on the body, right?
Yeah.
And the baby will take whatever it needs from whatever you've got. So women are left very depleted because they're starting off from a place of depletion. Also, you can't address a lot of health issues while you're pregnant. So ideally, we want to be getting those underlying conditions or any sort of imbalances healed and fixed before you get pregnant, because remember, you are passing on all of that stuff to your baby. So we don't want to just get pregnant and have a baby. We want to have a healthy baby. So it is transgenerational, and we need to understand that it's not just about us. Also, some health struggles obviously impact pregnancy. So if you've got gut issues, like H. pylori can be a factor for infertility, or anyone who is struggling with fertility. Thyroid imbalance, very common huge impact on fertility and the development of the baby. Low nutrient status. So all of these things can not only impact your pregnancy, but can impact the health of your baby. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And I would say, if you don't have a year to prepare, or you know, at minimum, I would say anywhere between 4 to 6 months is sort of ideal to give yourself time to make certain changes. Now, what do I mean by certain changes? The first thing that I would do is to get tested. So straight off the bat, get tested, get a full comprehensive preconception lab work panel that can really be a great baseline look into your overall health. And we can tell a lot from blood work and certain biomarkers to understand where your overall health is and what could potentially be triggers for fertility struggles. If you need to, then functional testing is also a great option if you have digestive issues or you have a long history of hormonal issues. So things like the GI map or Dutch testing can also be really great. Making sure your foundations are in place. So, you know, is your stress managed? Are you eating enough? Are you eating a nutrient-dense diet? Are you moving regularly? Do you have a healthy relationship with your partner? Where is your mental and emotional resilience at? You know, do you have a good relationship with your food? Do you have a good relationship with your body? You know, all of these things are really important. Plus, a bonus would be to obviously make sure you're having good energy throughout the day. You've got balanced blood sugar. You know, you've got happiness and joy in your life. You are, you know, financially stable, career stable. All of these things are ideal because obviously, you know, you're bringing a baby into this world, and a lot of people think that like, oh, well, once the baby comes, that's going to save our marriage, or that's going to fix this, or that's going to fix that. But there's a lot of things outside of just diet and lifestyle that I think a lot of couples need to address prior to getting pregnant. And one thing that I always ask clients that come and work in my practice is, if you were to take your life and your body and your overall health right now, exactly the way it is, and add a baby to that equation, exactly the way it is, what would that look like? Would that be ideal for you, for the baby? And that's where it, you know, people start to think, oh no, I need to actually make these changes, or I need to make these changes. So taking the time to do that is really important. Another really common thing that I recommend people to do in my practice is to go to the dentist. So if you have decided to get pregnant, I would very much recommend that you go see, ideally, a biological dentist, or if you don't have a biological dentist near you or access to a biological dentist, then just a normal dentist for you and your partner, because there are so many studies that show the correlation between fertility struggles and oral health issues. So gum disease, inflammation. Wow. We obviously have an oral microbiome, just like we have a gut microbiome. So any imbalances, bacteria issues, anything like that can definitely affect fertility. So that would be the next thing to do. Getting on a quality prenatal would be one of the other foundational steps to do once you've started, you know, you decide you want a baby. So choosing a quality prenatal that has quality ingredients. You know, the 1 a day prenatal is not what you're looking for. You need high quality, high doses, high concentrations of nutrients to support you and the baby. And also getting your husband or your partner on one is important as well, because sperm health, let's face it, is not great these days. Yeah. Cleaning out your pantry. So making sure, you know, you look at the products that you're using in your household, on your skin, in your home, you know, the kind of food that you're eating, and getting your husband and your partner on board from day one, right? So it's not just the woman's responsibility to do all of this work. They are 50% of the equation, and we need to include the men from day one. And I think there's a lot of, you know, there's this huge misconception that it's just the woman that needs to be doing because she's the one that's getting pregnant. Whereas, you know, the men's DNA has a massive impact on the health of the baby and can also lead to miscarriages. So that if the male's health is compromised, that can actually be a contributing factor to the woman miscarrying. So we cannot discount the importance of sperm health, the importance of your partner's health in this whole equation.
My God. Okay, Sandra, you're going to have to stay there for 2 seconds. I just need to blow my nose. Just give me one moment.
No worries.
Sorry, my immune system has also just been shot to shit, obviously.
Everything is imagine. I can imagine.
Everything is great. Okay, sorry.
No worries.
And then moving on to ovulation windows. Again, bizarrely, having now been pregnant for the 3rd time, which I think I can say this because I feel like the world will know when this episode comes out, my ovulation window is so obvious now and has become so much more obvious 3rd time round than it was before. I didn't even notice an ovulation window before I got pregnant for the 1st time. Now, after my 2nd child, my sex drive goes up. There's really clear signs. But firstly, why is that? Why does your body become more obvious?
Your body change. Yeah, I mean, it can change. It can actually go the opposite direction as well. So
really,
it depends on the person. Yeah.
Wow.
Your body changes after pregnancy.
But how can we establish our ovulation windows and to conceive naturally? At what point should we be doing the deed during our ovulation window? Because I feel like there's a lot of misconception around this topic as well.
Yeah. So basically, in order to understand your ovulation window better, you need to track your cycle. So there's 2 ways. You either track your cycle, which I think every woman should be properly doing anyways, but you can also go by symptoms. So just like you said, there are women who are very body aware and can actually track ovulation and know that they're ovulating from symptoms. So for example, your breasts will get fuller. You feel obviously a higher libido. Your body temperature will go up. Some women also experience something called Mittelschmerz, which is that little sort of pinging pain that's in your ovaries, and that's the actual release of an egg from your ovaries. So there are certain symptoms that you can actually associate with ovulation. And of course, your cervical fluid. So you need to understand what cervical mucus is or what cervical fluid is. So cervical mucus is what's essential for carrying sperm to your egg. So it is produced in order to basically facilitate sperm going to the egg. And estrogen is a big part of and responsible for the production of your cervical fluid. Now, cervical fluid changes throughout your cycle. So in the beginning of your cycle, when you have your period and right after your period, you won't notice any sort of discharge or any sort of cervical fluid, and it's going to be quite dry. So there will be no discharge. As we get closer to your fertile window, which is sort of 5 to 6 days where you are actually fertile in your cycle, you start to see changes in your cervical fluid, and it becomes more like egg white, viscous in color, and more of this, like you'll start to notice more of this like wet feeling when you're wiping or in your pants or anything like that. So that is when you know you are in your fertile window. And that viscous fertile fluid is like your peak fertile fluid. Now, so many women will actually start trying or have intercourse after that happens. But rule of thumb is we want to actually keep the sperm waiting. Okay, so sperm can actually live in your uterus for about 5 to 6 days. So if you were to have sex before your ovulation, your peak ovulation, that is actually going to help you improve the chances of getting pregnant. So I would say a few days before your peak ovulation day, and then maybe on peak ovulation day is going to improve your chances than waiting after you've peak ovulated and then you have sex then. So
interesting.
And that's what a lot of women actually do. And so the timing of when you have intercourse is really important. But also people think that if you have intercourse like every single day during that peak ovulation or during that fertile window is necessary. You don't need to do that. And it actually dilutes sperm. It dilutes, the sperm. So we don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that we don't overdo it. And sort of every 2 to 3 days is totally fine. I would say every 48 hours. I know women who have intercourse like 5 to 6 times a day during those days. And I'm like, guys, you need to slow down, hun. So that's not going to be helping your situation. So yeah, timing of the intercourse is obviously really important within that fertile window. And like I said, the most important thing is to start tracking it. So when you start tracking your basal body temperature, and there's a lot of sort of gadgets and things that you can use, like TempDrop is one of them, the Inito fertility monitor, these wearable devices and these tools that can help you track your basal body temperature and also your cervical fluid and your hormones and stuff during that time. So we want to make sure that your basal body temperature rises. And when you see a rise of 3 consecutive days of body temperature, that means that you have ovulated. So it basically confirms that you have ovulated, and your cervical fluid confirms that ovulation is essentially coming. That fertile window is essentially coming, and you can pinpoint when that peak fertile day is from those symptoms.
Can I ask then, if you are that person who's like, right, I'm going to have sex 5 times a day, does that decrease the quality of the sperm?
Yes. So that's what I mean by it dilutes the quality. So we don't want to dilute it. We want it to stay more concentrated, obviously. So that improves the chances of getting pregnant. So yeah, more is not necessarily better.
Okay.
Yeah, every few days is totally fine.
Now I want to move on to hypothyroidism. Am I saying that right?
Hypothyroidism.
Can you tell us what this is, and how do we know if we have a hypothyroid?
So hypothyroidism is basically a condition. So it's an imbalance in your thyroid gland. So your thyroid basically doesn't produce enough thyroid hormone. And you can get that tested very easily on a blood test, but you have to make sure that you are getting a full thyroid panel to understand the different hormones that are at play when it comes to your thyroid health. So there's obviously your thyroid health, your thyroid hormones that your thyroid produces, but also there's a thyroid, a TSH, which is in your brain, and that signals to the thyroid to make those hormones. So there's several hormones that you need to test in order to have a very clear picture of whether or not you have hypothyroidism. The leading cause of hypothyroidism in adults is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is the autoimmune thyroid condition where your body creates these antibodies against your thyroid. So, and you can test that as well by testing your antibodies. And that is the leading cause for developing hypothyroidism in adults. Now, hypothyroidism that's quite a loaded question because there are so many factors that affect your thyroid. Diet and stress and your environment are the 3 sort of leading factors, but there's also a genetic or hereditary factor as well. So if it runs in your family, you're more likely to get it. And essentially, in order to cure it, it really depends on your case. So a lot of people sort of come to the endocrinologist with a very low thyroid situation. So they're very extreme hypothyroid, which is what I had. So when I got diagnosed with hypothyroidism, I was actually 16 years old and my body was legitimately shutting down. And so they said that at the time, my only option was to go on medication, which is thyroid hormone replacement. Now, I could have maybe gotten off of thyroid hormone replacement had I understood at the time that diet, stress, trauma, environment, all of these things massively affect your thyroid. And so does gut imbalance and gut dysbiosis. And there's an interplay there between those. I did also have Hashimoto's. So all of these things are connected. And a lot of people get on medication and they're just told that they need to be on medication for life, which is unfortunately what happened to me. Because nobody at the time had that education of what we could do to help our thyroid from a root cause perspective and essentially wean someone off medication. So I unfortunately have been on medication for far too long for me to ever get off medication. And now I don't have a thyroid anymore because of my thyroid cancer. So I had to remove my thyroid altogether. So now I have no option but to be on medication. Otherwise, my body would literally shut down. So we need to understand what actually causes thyroid issues. And this is, again, going back to the idea of understanding or asking the question why. And this is something that I constantly asked in my own journey and never got the answers for it. So why is your thyroid imbalanced? There are so many factors that lead to thyroid imbalance, and it's extremely sensitive to stress, all kinds of stressors. If you're not eating enough, if you've got stress or trauma in your life, if you're chronically stressed out, if you are having, like I said, gut issues, if you're, that can obviously spur on the autoimmune part of it. So there are so many factors that can essentially lead to hypothyroidism. And it's, depending on where you are on that spectrum, how hypothyroid are you, you may need medication for a short period of time until your thyroid levels level out, and then you can hopefully wean off the medication. But a lot of people are put on medication for life without understanding how to support the thyroid at the same time.
And hypothyroidism can cause fertility issues as well 100%. As well as miscarriage.
Yes, 100%. So thyroid function is really essential to fertility and reproductive function and keeping a healthy pregnancy. So there are actually thyroid hormone receptors on your ovaries and your endometrium. And women who have thyroid imbalance or high antibodies, so they have the autoimmune thyroiditis, could actually have a harder time with fertility or pregnancy in general. So it can affect egg quality, and it can affect your fertility outcomes in general. So, and that really spurs on from the foundation of the fact that thyroid issues affect your menstrual cycle, and it will affect your progesterone and estrogen balance. All of that is linked. So your thyroid hormones need progesterone, and your progesterone needs your thyroid. And if those two are imbalanced, then that will obviously affect your fertility. Not to mention that your thyroid is essential to baby's development. It is so important to make sure that you test your thyroid prior to getting pregnant. So many women do not test, and I've unfortunately heard horrible stories of women who have high antibodies, all kinds of subclinical hypothyroidism, so lower levels, slightly suboptimal levels of thyroid hormone, and have miscarried and lost babies well into their second and third trimesters. So it's so important to monitor your thyroid health because it is essential to the baby's growth and development. That is, like, I cannot scream that more from the rooftops, because there are still doctors that do not monitor thyroid health or don't test it the right way.
Can your thyroid be checked whilst you're pregnant, or is it considered to be too late then?
No, you can definitely check it while you're pregnant, but ideally, we want to monitor that before pregnancy, and it should be monitored before pregnancy. Yeah. Because remember, like, the first few weeks of pregnancy are really critical, right? That first trimester is really critical in the baby's development. We want to avoid things like neural tube defects, and all of that stuff. So if there is any sort of thyroid imbalance before you get pregnant, that could affect the baby's development in those few weeks. Not to mention that a lot of women who miscarry are not told that they have subclinical hypothyroidism, which is essentially not something that a lot of doctors pay attention to because it's still within the conventional lab range. But if you have a TSH of 2.5 or above, that could actually lead to miscarriage. So we need to make sure that your TSH levels are anywhere between 1 to 2.5, ideally, maximum 2.5, in order to reduce the likelihood of miscarrying, and to make sure that your thyroid is in a good place for that first trimester and for the development of the baby during the pregnancy. But yes, absolutely, your thyroid should be monitored throughout your pregnancy 100%. And if you have any thyroid imbalance prior to your pregnancy, obviously check all of this with your endocrinologist. But that might warrant higher medication levels or starting medication just to kind of prevent the risks that any sort of thyroid imbalance could have.
So this is so interesting because I've always had, my thyroid has never been wildly, mine is, I think it's low. Is that correct? So I have a slow thyroid.
Slow thyroid, yeah. Hypothyroid. Hypothyroid, yeah.
And I've had 2 chemical pregnancies before, one before this current pregnancy and one before I had Isla. And both times I've been put on progesterone to keep the pregnancy. And I've never really understood as to why, but it's worked both times, touch wood so far anyway.
Okay.
And I'm guessing they kind of work hand in hand.
Your thyroid and your progesterone?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people are put on progesterone to support pregnancies in the first trimester.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need progesterone. It really depends on a case-by-case basis. And that's why tracking your progesterone is really important as well before pregnancy, because we want to make sure that we are above a 15 NGML, so nanograms per milliliter, is ideal for pregnancy. A lot of women are sort of sitting at the 10 range, which means that you're still ovulating, but you don't have a strong ovulation to maybe support a pregnancy. So you might end up miscarrying. So it depends on the case. Yes, progesterone can be needed or necessary, but it's not always necessary for everyone.
And then moving on to zinc and iron as well. I know those levels are also really, really important when it comes to getting pregnant and then also keeping a pregnancy. Do we need to get iron and zinc tested before we fall pregnant?
Yeah, so zinc, iron is one of those things that can definitely, so if you have iron deficiency or anemia or anything like that, that can definitely affect your pregnancy. It can definitely affect fertility outcomes. So testing those things is really, really important. And you essentially want to make sure that you don't have any sort of iron deficiency. Obviously, getting iron from your diet is going to be the most important thing. So are you actually eating enough iron-rich foods? Are you absorbing iron properly? So do you have anything with your gut health that could affect, or your digestive system that could affect iron? And yes, those nutrients and minerals are really important for fertility, for our hormones, and for making sure that we have healthy babies.
And what about things like sugar, caffeine, and alcohol? Now, I feel like when I first tried to get pregnant, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you must cut out caffeine and alcohol. Are these 3 things something we should seriously consider cutting down on or cutting out if we're serious about getting pregnant, or is this just a myth?
So I'm going to start with caffeine. So caffeine really depends on what kind of caffeine. Some people can actually have issues breaking down caffeine. So if you're one of those people who gets really jittery or anxious when you drink caffeine, then maybe reducing. So first of all, how much caffeine are you drinking during the day? I would not be recommending anything more than 1 to 2 cups of coffee maximum. If you are having other caffeinated drinks, so things like sodas, even if they are like diet sodas, I would definitely remove those from your diet completely. There's actually been studies that show that women who consumed 2 or more sodas a day were up to, I think it was about 50% more likely to experience ovulatory infertility than women who didn't drink or drank less than 1 soda a week. So, that's quite a significant number. And also, just because it's alternatively sweetened, or if it's like diet, whatever, that can actually also have implications on your partner's fertility. There are studies that show there's a reduction in fertility from those kinds of beverages. Also, same thing with energy drinks, they've been related to higher issues with infertility, even in women who have consumed them in moderation. So I would completely remove that kind of caffeinated drinks and soda beverages and alternatively sweetened things. Alcohol, 100%. Alcohol not only completely elevates estradiol levels, so your estrogen levels, and it's responsible for a whole host of symptoms. So things like heavier periods, more menstrual cramping, and in general, these higher estrogen level symptoms that you can see. So we don't want to continuously raise estrogen in our bodies. We want to make sure that our estrogen is balanced. And if your estrogen isn't balanced, then it's going to start to impact also your progesterone levels, which will impact fertility. So drinking definitely depletes also the nutrients that you need for your ovarian function. It will definitely deplete sperm health. So I would definitely avoid alcohol and make sure that your partner avoids alcohol as well, because there's a huge link between alcohol consumption and the depletion of or the sort of demise of sperm health.
Really so interesting. And then before we start to round up, I wanted to touch base on the MTHRF gene. Now, this was something that was flagged to me by another lady that we actually had on the podcast. I'd never heard of it before, and she said it's something that we should all get tested. Can you just tell us a little bit more about this gene and what it is and how it affects our fertility?
Yeah, so we can start off by sort of talking about folate. So folate is an essential nutrient that we need for preventing birth defects. Now, when you have the MTHFR gene variation, it basically affects the body's ability to utilize. So women who take folic acid, for example, in a prenatal, which is generally recommended by doctors to take folic acid to help obviously avoid neural tube defects and support a pregnancy. It can actually prevent the body's ability to utilize that synthetic folic acid and turn it into folate. So essentially, it's something that affects, I think, the majority of women out there. And in order to bypass it, I would say the easiest way to bypass it, if you haven't tested it, or if you're not going to test it, although you should test for that, especially if you've been struggling to get pregnant. But to bypass it, I would make sure you are choosing a quality prenatal that has L-methylfolate in it, in order to make sure that your body uses that form of folate and is able to use it and utilize it properly. Otherwise, you're taking folic acid, but your body's unable to turn it into folate and unable to use it to support a pregnancy and to support a healthy, the healthy development of the baby.
Without folate, folate is very important, isn't it, for a healthy pregnancy? If we were to find out we were 4 months pregnant and hadn't been taking folate, would we be in trouble? Would the baby be in trouble?
Not necessarily, but I would definitely make sure you're taking a prenatal as soon as you find out that you're pregnant, if you haven't already started taking a prenatal before. Now, the idea of taking a prenatal before you get pregnant or before you start trying is really important, because we want to up our nutrient stores, right? So the higher levels of nutrients that we can get before we get pregnant is going to help us, because your baby needs a big amount of nutrients in those first few weeks of pregnancy, right? To prevent miscarriages, to prevent, any sort of defects, to make sure that the baby is really developing properly in those first few weeks. And you don't really find out you're pregnant until you're about 4 or 5 weeks, right? So you've already gone 4 to 5 weeks in that pregnancy, And if you're from a, if you've gotten pregnancy while you're already depleted, then that could potentially have, repercussions. Not necessarily, but it could. And, we want to just get our bodies in a place where we have those excess nutrient stores, because a lot of women are not getting those nutrients on a daily basis from their diet. So having a quality prenatal will just kind of help fill in the gaps and make sure that we have those excess nutrient stores for pregnancy.
And then my last question for you today is on food and toxins. Mm-hmm. So if there are 3 foods that we should be eating in early pregnancy and 3 toxins we should remove from our life, what are they?
So the first thing that I would start with is making sure you are getting enough protein. I talk about this all the time just from an overall health perspective for your hormones, but it's also extremely important for fetal development to get enough protein. It is, the animal protein in particular, because it is more bioavailable, it is rich in nutrients, it is rich in minerals that we need in order to help support the pregnancy and support fetal development. It also helps us with postpartum recovery. It also helps us with maintaining muscle mass, which is, again, really important. As we obviously expand and our bodies change in pregnancy, we need to be able to hold that weight in a healthy way without compromising our joints and all of that. So protein, animal protein, 100%. And 95% of the women that come into my practice who are struggling to get pregnant are barely hitting the very minimum requirement of protein. So that is number 1. Number 2, omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s are extremely important for, again, baby's brain development, for reducing inflammation, which is often one of those things that can really affect fertility and prevent a pregnancy if you have a lot of omega-6s versus omega-3s in your diet. So we want to reduce inflammation, and omega-3 fatty acids are really helpful in reducing inflammation in the body, also essential for baby's brain development. And then I would say the third one, I might have to say 4 actually. So the third one would be choline. Choline as a nutrient, again, super essential. It is found primarily in eggs. If you cannot eat eggs, make sure you get a quality prenatal that is high in choline. Again, so important for fetal development. And most women are deficient in choline. There are multiple studies that show the importance of choline. And then the fourth one I would say is probably chicken liver or some form of organ meats, because they are extremely high in vitamin A, extremely high in iron, extremely high in all these nutrients and minerals that it's basically like your body's multivitamin. And if you are struggling with hormone issues, if you're struggling with thyroid issues, if you're struggling with any sort of imbalances or struggling to get pregnant, struggling to make good progesterone, and you're not having organ meats or chicken liver in your diet, then please start. I know it sounds intimidating, but if you need recipes, I've got recipes that I can share to make consuming that a little bit less or a little bit more palatable, I would say.
I am obsessed with chicken liver pate.
It's so good.
I love it. And that's fine during the first trimester. It's fine during pregnancy.
It's fine during pregnancy. There is like a big misconception that chicken liver is not okay. But
amazing.
You can definitely eat it in moderation, obviously. I mean, you're not eating chicken liver every single day.
No.
But it's very important for your health.
I've actually, this pregnancy, I've been craving only savory food, and in particular coronation chicken and egg, like cheesy egg muffins. I just make egg muffins constantly and just devour them. It's really
good.
Bad.
Get the choline in.
Yeah, exactly. You said that. I was like, oh, I think I'm doing this at the moment. I think I'm on track. And Sandra, for anyone who wants to reach out and say hi, where can they find you?
So Instagram is probably the best place to find me, at Sandra Sharpe with an E Wellness. I've got loads of resources there, programs that you can jump into. And if you have any questions, just let me know that you listen to this podcast episode and I will be happy to guide you.
And as always, everybody, please feel free to rate, review, subscribe. If you'd like this episode, please leave us a little comment. We'd love to hear from you. And you can find us on Instagram at We Are Mother Tongue. Sandra, you've been incredible. Thank you so much for kickstarting this season and sharing all your words of wisdom with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.